Hello, good morning. We are Group 4, and regarding the topics of human intervention and imperialism, we are going to present the case of the Syrian civil war in order to get all your thoughts through. Sandra will start with a little introduction for context.
So the case of Syria in 2013 presented an ethical dilemma for humanitarian intervention because it involved the use of chemical weapons by the Syrian government against civilians, which later on constituted to a grave violation of human rights. So the use of these weapons resulted in the death of hundreds of civilians and injured thousands more, many of them women and children. The international community was faced with whether to intervene to stop these atrocities, and if so, what form that intervention should take. However, there were several ethical considerations that made intervention difficult and contentious. So one of the main issues was the lack of international consensus on the appropriate response to the situation. Some countries, such as the United States and France, advocated for military intervention to punish the Syrian government for its use of chemical weapons and to prevent further atrocities. However, other countries, including Russia and China, opposed such action and argued that it would violate Syria's sovereignty and risk escalation of the conflict. Additionally, there were concerns about the potential consequences of military intervention, such as the risk of civilian casualties, the possibility of further destabilization of the region, and the potential for the conflict to spread beyond Syria's borders. Ultimately, the lack of international consensus and the complex ethical considerations surrounding military intervention made it difficult for the international community to act decisively in response to the crisis in Syria. It is important to know the religious situation in the country, and therefore I'm going to state the quote that the Syrian government is led by the Alawite minority, which is a Shia sect of Islam that comprises about 10% of the Syrian population. The majority of the Syrian population is Sunni Muslim, and many opposition groups are dominated by the Sunnis.
So Russia's perspective on the Syrian conflict may be explained through an ethnocentric perspective. So we Russians have a very strong national identity and a cultural heritage, and we view our involvement in Syria as a means of defending and promoting our cultural and political values in the region. So our stance on the conflict is shaped by our geopolitical interest, as is the case of the other parties involved in this discussion. But it is also a product of our historic relationship with Syria and our perception of the Western powers' roles in the region. As such, our involvement in the conflict can be seen as, on one side, a manifestation of our ethnocentric worldview, and on the other side, our desire to protect our strategic interests and the ones of our allies. So as a side note, ethnocentrism is a tendency to view one's own cultural group as superior to others and to judge other cultures based on one's cultural norms and values. In the context of professional deontology, ethnocentrism can be seen as a violation of the principle of respect for diversity and the recognition of the inherent worth and dignity of all individuals and groups. That being said, Russia supports the actions of the administration of incumbent President Bashar al-Assad. And since the beginning of the Syrian conflict in 2011, we, Russia, have provided both political and military aid to the Syrian government. And as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, we have repeatedly vetoed Western-sponsored draft resolution that demanded the resignation of President Bashar al-Assad and that opened the possibility of UN sanctions against his government. We want to make it clear that Russia and Syria's relationship goes way beyond the recent events, and that from our perspective, the Syrian government used chemical weapons to fight against terrorism and extremism. The use of these weapons was totally justified. Our question is, why the United States and allies destabilizing the region by interfering in Syria's internal affairs and supporting extremist groups?
So to answer the question proposed by Russia, we can apply the theoretical approach of realism when it comes to our participation and to our involvement in the conflict. So there's no doubt that states are the primary actors in the international system, and our behavior must be to pursue power and security. It's clear that the international system is anarchic. There's no central authority to enforce rules or resolve disputes. And that's why we must be at a constant competition between states to secure our interests. We compulsorily needed to be involved primarily due to our strategic interest. We had to maintain stability in the Middle East, which is a key region for global oil production and transportation. Additionally, we had to prevent the spread of terrorism in the region, particularly after the attacks of September 11 in 2001. So don't you think it's completely normal that we were concerned with the rise of extremist groups like ISIS, groups that have carried out attacks on US soil and threaten our interests, our people? So we were simply looking to combat terrorism by supporting local partners, conducting military operations, and providing intelligence and logistical support to regional allies. So it's as simple as that, and we did nothing wrong. We just wanted to counterbalance the influence of other regional powers, particularly Russia and Iran. It was our priority to limit their influence in the region, both to protect our interests and to prevent the emergence of a rival power bloc, as these two countries were supporting Bashar al-Assad. Do we really need to explain why we were right to intervene? I think that's enough. That's enough clarification. And it does not matter if our tactics were too radical. It doesn't matter how many airstrikes we carried out against ISIS and other groups, or whether we provided military aid to opposition forces and deployed troops to support local partners. The UN Human Rights Office estimates that more than 3,100 civilians were killed over 10 years in the Syria conflict. But it doesn't matter how many people died as long as we and our allies accomplished our mission. What really matters is whether the US succeeds in aligning others more closely to our interests. So the US is constantly accused of destabilizing the region and supporting extremist groups, but really we only provided essential humanitarian assistance and supported the Syrian people, and everything we did was in line with international law and the UN Charter principles of responsibility to protect. So basically, we, the US, we simply prevented mass atrocities and protected the Syrian people from harm. So we can conclude that we're only seeking to protect our interests because that's the way the international system works. We wanted to counterbalance rival powers and maintain stability in the region. So we use also a range of effective diplomatic, military, and economic tools to achieve this objective. And we Americans, we the US, we believe we did a good work with it.
So similar to the United States, we, our Iranian territory, are a powerful state with a history of involvement in regional conflicts and view this war through a realist lens. In this conflict, we prioritize our own interests and allies over any ethical or humanitarian consideration. One of our primary interests in the region is countering the influence of its rivals, such as Saudi Arabia and Israel. We, in fact, see the Syrian war as a battleground for a larger struggle for power and influence in the Middle East. Therefore, we support the Syrian government and its military involvement in the conflict as a strategic move to protect its interests and allies, even if it means using brutal tactics or engaging in a proxy warfare. For Iran, for us, the Assad regime represents an important ally and key partner in its regional strategy. We view the fall of the Assad regime as a potential threat to its own security and stability, as it would weaken Iran's influence in the region and potentially open up new avenues for Saudi Arabia and other rivals to exert their influence. So as a result, we have provided significant military, economic, and diplomatic support to the Syrian government, including other advisors, volunteers, and paramilitary forces. to join the conflict. We believe that the Syrian war is a fight against terrorism and foreign intervention, and that the conflict is a proxy war between regional and global powers. We support the Syrian government, as I have mentioned previously, through various means. For example, and more precisely, we've sent thousands of troops, volunteers, and advisors. Therefore, we acknowledge that, yes, while there are some human rights violations that have been committed by the Syrian government and its forces, we still argue that these violations are systematic and not intentional. We believe that the focus on human rights violations by the Syrian government is a pretext to justify foreign intervention and regime change in Syria. Therefore, we stand and will always support the efforts by the Syrian government to implement necessary reforms and to fight against extremism, while also advocating for a political solution to the conflict that respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria.
Okay. As the Syrian opposition, I have seen the devastation and horror that the Syrian war has brought upon our people. We have been fighting against a brutal dictatorship that has no regard for human life and has been willing to use any means necessary to maintain its grip on power. We are a diverse and fragmented group that contains different viewpoints and ideologies. Through the lenses of cultural relativism, we could say that while cultural relativism is important for promoting understanding and understanding the tolerance between different cultures, it should not be used as a shield for human rights abuses or oppressive practices. We call the international community to stand up for universal human rights and to support the Syrian people on their struggle for freedom and democracy. The Assad regime has used chemical weapons, barrel bombs, and other indiscriminate tactics to kill innocent civilians, including women and children. We have seen hospitals, schools, and even residential neighborhoods targeted by the regime's forces. This has left millions of Syrians displaced and struggling to survive. We believe that the international community has a responsibility to intervene to protect the Syrian people. We have seen how other countries, such as Libya, have been able to receive support from the international community to oust their own dictators. Yet, despite years of pleading, we have not seen the same level of support for our struggle. We understand that some countries are wary of intervening in Syria due to concerns about the potential for escalation and instability in the region. However, we believe that there are measures that can be taken to protect the people without escalating the conflict. One option could be the establishment of safe zones within Syria where civilians can seek for refuge from the violence. Another option could be the imposition of a no-fly zone to prevent the regime from using air power to target civilians. These are just some measures that could be taken to help and protect our people. We know that there are no easy answers when it comes to the Syrian war. However, we believe that the international community has a moral obligation to do everything in its power to protect innocent civilians from the horrors of war. We urge the world to take action and help bring an end to this senseless conflict.
I represent ISIS, and we are an Islamist group that seeks to establish a transnational caliphate, and we justify our actions in Syria as a means to achieve our goal. Therefore, it is unlikely that we would view humanitarian intervention in a positive light. From a consequentialist point of view, humanitarian intervention aims to prevent or alleviate suffering and promote the well-being of individuals and communities. However, we operate under a different set of values and principles. We prioritize our ideology over the well-being of others. In fact, we are known to use humanitarian crisis as a means of recruitment and propaganda. For example, we have exploited the plight of refugees to paint themselves as protectors of the Muslim community and justify their violent actions. Overall, it is unlikely that we would see humanitarian intervention as a positive or justifiable action given our ideology. As a proud member of ISIS, I strongly believe in the establishment of an Islamic caliphate in Syria. To me, this is the ultimate goal of the Syrian civil war, and I believe that any actions my group takes to achieve this objective are justifiable. I see the caliphate as a political and religious state founded on Islamic principles that will bring justice and harmony to the region. From a consequentialist perspective, I understand the importance of assessing the impact of our actions. According to this ethical framework, an action is considered ethically correct if it produces positive results. However, I acknowledge that some of our activities have resulted in unfavorable outcomes for the unfaithful. These outcomes were displacement, infrastructure loss, and the spread of terror. However, I firmly believe that these are necessary sacrifices to achieve our ultimate goal. I also do understand that for the international community, our methods, including brutality and terrorism, are controversial. However, I believe that they are justified if they produce positive results, the ones that we are looking for. Unfortunately, some people see us as a source of instability and terror, but to me, those who oppose our group are our enemies, and their death is not negative in our eyes. We are simply separating the wheat from the chaff, working towards our goal of creating a transnational caliphate and putting an end to the Western domination and oppression of our region.
Now, when it comes to the way that France implemented human intervention in Syria, well, it can be argued against by liberal thinkers. If you don't recall, the liberalism is this ideology that emphasizes individual rights, freedoms, and limited government intervention in the affairs of individuals and society. And you all know me. I'm always advocating for the protection of civilians and the delivery of humanitarian aid to those that are in need. And since the beginning of the conflict in Syria, I have been one of the largest donors of humanitarian aid to this region. I provided financial assistance, medical supplies, and other forms of support to the refugees and internal displaced persons. However, liberalists might consider that I violated the principle of non-intervention and respect for state sovereignty. I should have prioritized the right of states to self-determination, even if there were human rights abuses occurring in Syria, which was the case. My intervention in Syria can therefore be seen as a violation of the principle of non-intervention and respect for state sovereignty, since I intervened in the internal affairs of another country. Liberals believe that individuals should have the freedom to choose their own government and determine their own political futures without external interference or coercion. In other terms, without me intervening. Would you personally prioritize state sovereignty over protection of individual human rights?
Now, I feel it's of crucial importance that I am allowed to give my stance. This is my country, and no one will understand this better than me. We're currently struggling for survival. Our response to the civil war and attacks on our sovereignty come from an existentialist and proudly ethnocentric thought. A little recap, existentialism is based on the idea of protecting individual freedoms, purpose in life, and accountability. Those coming in to attack, try and weaken our state are a threat to our true civilian Syrian individuals, our dignity and deserved national autonomy. There's an eminent sense of responsibility for the protection of our citizens against those external threats. Sadly, these terrorists and foreign-backed insurgents have left us no option but to use force to defend our people. We acknowledge the help and support provided by our allies, regardless of our different purpose for involvement in this war. And hereby I thank Russia, Iran, and China. Thank you. Thank you for vouching for our people. On another hand, I am proudly ethnocentric as to why I will defend Syria under the Alawite rule to death. Those who oppose us pose a threat for us. I believe we are inherently superior to them and will never give in. Their beliefs are not aligned with ours, and there is absolutely nothing I can do. They have to join us or leave the country. We are the most enlightened and advanced religion. We are a syncretic blend of Shia Islam, Christianity, and Islamic pagan beliefs. We have taken the best of each and made it our own. Not only that, but we have undergone severe persecutions and marginalization since the beginning of our time during the Ottoman Empire. Nevertheless, regardless of external forces throughout history trying to bring us down, we have survived united and strong. How it will stay. Now, I want to ask you, Westerners, why are you against us? Why do you believe in external actors and support the terrorists who are attacking us? I pose an example to make you hesitate. Look at our brother Iran, who also suffered from unwanted international intervention for no reason whatsoever. They intervened under the claim that Iran had nuclear weapons, yet there is no evidence up until today to prove so. Regardless of your efforts, this is just demonstrating your Western bias. So now I pose the question back to you. Why not defend the legitimate government of al-Assad, who has been there for us since the year 2000? Why are you against our religion when proved superior? Why do you want external intervention? Thank you very much for listening to our presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it and could understand the different points of view. Now we want to hear back your opinion. Who do you agree with? Who do you disagree with? Here on the post, we're going to have some additional questions just in case you want to answer them and we want to hear your thoughts. Thank you.